I never thought I'd watch my own brother slap my 7-year-old son across the face. And I certainly never imagined my parents would laugh. It happened in front of 50 people. Family, friends, even strangers. The slap echoed across the marble-floored hall of Timberstone Lodge like a gunshot, loud, sharp, and impossible to ignore. And yet, they ignored it. They called it discipline. They said Eli was out of line for singing too loudly. My Sonmi, joyful, gentle boy, was beaming with pride as he sang a silly song he'd written about trees and pancakes, surrounded by cousins who didn't bother to hide their smirks. And Kyle, my brother, the golden child of the Monroe family, the man who never heard the word no in his life. He stood up, walked across the room, and slapped Eli without a second of hesitation. I froze. I don't know if it was the sound, the shock, or the crushing weight of every memory that rushed back every time I'd been told to be quiet, sit still, not embarrass the family. Was I really seeing this? Was everyone else really not seeing it? My son's cheek turned red, his voice stopped mid-note, and his eyes filled with confusion before they filled with tears. And my father said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Finally, someone's teaching that kid some respect." Someone laughed. My mother. Maybe out of shock. Maybe out of loyalty. But in that moment, I realized something had broken. Not just Eli's trust, not just my heart. Something in the very foundation of what I thought family was supposed to mean. They weren't going to protect him. So I would. Even if it meant tearing everything else down. If you've ever been told to keep the peace while someone else was getting hurt, leave a comment below. Let's not stay silent for the sake of appearances. Because what happened next wasn't just a reaction. It was a reckoning. I used to think that maybe, just maybe, if I behaved exactly right, they'd finally see me. But in the Monroe family, being seen wasn't about who you were. It was about how well you fit the mold, and I never fit. Growing up, Kyle was the star. The athlete, the straight-A student, the natural-born leader at least. That's what everyone said. He could do no wrong. When he broke a neighbor's window playing baseball, it was boys will be boys. When I spilled juice on the carpet, it was, Rachel, you're so careless. I learned early to disappear. My father, a retired Navy commander, didn't believe in softness. Discipline, structure, achievement, those were his love languages. And Kyle, he spoke them fluently. I, on the other hand, was quieter. Sensitive. More interested in sketching birds in the backyard than learning how to shake hands like a CEO. Rachel needs thicker skin. My mother would whisper at dinner parties, her wine glass in hand, her smile tight. She cries too easily, feels too much. I started folding myself smaller just to make space for everyone else. Birthdays were a masterclass in contrast. Kyle's parties were grand affairs, backyard tents, rented sound systems, neighborhood-wide invitations. Mine were usually forgotten until the day before, celebrated with a last-minute cake from Safeway and a card that still had the price tag inside. I remember once, when I was 11, I saved up my allowance to buy my mom a silver bracelet for Mother's Day. I wrapped it in tissue paper and left it on her dresser. That evening, she came into my room and said, "You shouldn't have wasted your money. It's not about gifts." End quote. The next day, Kyle gave her a potted plant he painted at school, crooked lettering and all. She cried, called him thoughtful, told everyone about it at church. I used to lie in bed at night wondering what was wrong with me, why nothing I did ever seemed enough. Was I too quiet? Too emotional? Too May? By high school, I'd mastered the art of invisibility. I studied hard, kept out of trouble, worked part-time jobs. And still, my father would say at dinner, "Kyle's got a shot at West Point. You should think about community college, Rachel. Keep it realistic." That word haunted me. Realistic. It wasn't advice, it was a ceiling. Even when I got into the state university with a partial scholarship, my mother said, "Well, let's see if you can handle it." I did. I graduated with honors. But they barely noticed. Kyle got engaged that year to a dentist's daughter, and my achievement was lost somewhere between floral arrangements and wedding invitations. I think part of me always believed that if I built a life far away, it would stop hurting. That distance could dull what they never gave. But the truth is, some wounds don't fade with time. They just get quieter until something wakes them up again. And that weekend at Timberstone Lodge? It didn't just wake them. It shook them wide open. I met Drew when I was 19, and at the time, I truly believed he was my way out. He was a year older, smart, soft-spoken, with a dry sense of humor and a kindness that felt like warm light in a cold room. We met in the university library, both reaching for the same worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. He let me have it, then sat 2 tables away and watched me read it for 3 hours straight. When I looked up, he smiled. That's how it started, simple, sweet, unthreatening. He didn't come from money, but he came from something better, a family that saw him. Parents who asked about his day and meant it. Siblings who teased, but gently. At our first dinner together, his mom handed me a second helping of lasagna and said, "You're safe here, honey." And I believed her. With Drew, I felt visible. Wanted. I didn't have to work so hard to earn a seat at the table. For the first time in my life, someone asked what I wanted, not who I was supposed to become. We married the summer I turned 21. It wasn't a big wedding. Just close friends, his family, and a few of my college classmates. My parents came, dressed like they were attending a funeral. My mother criticized the dress too plain, and my father pulled Drew aside to remind him, marriage is about results, not feelings. Kyle sent a gift. A set of wine glasses engraved with our initials. No note. But I didn't care. I was starting over. We moved into a tiny apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet, and it still felt like freedom. I worked a part-time job at a daycare while finishing my degree. Drew got accepted to a dual JD MBA program across the state and commuted twice a week. It was messy, tight, sometimes tense, but we were trying. When I found out I was pregnant with Eli, we cried on the bathroom floor, arms around each other, terrified and thrilled. Drew said, "We'll figure it out. He's going to know he's loved. That's all that matters." And, for a while, it was true. Eli came into the world during a spring thunderstorm. 7 pounds of wonder with my eyes and Drew's serious little frown. Becoming a mother cracked something open in me, something tender and fierce. I made a promise, holding that tiny body against my chest, that he would never feel what I had felt growing up. He would never question his worth. He would never have to shrink to be loved. But the cracks in our marriage started showing long before I noticed. Drew took a clerkship in Boston when Eli was 3. The distance crept in like fog, calls unanswered, visits delayed. Then one night, I saw a message light up his tablet screen while he was in the shower. "Miss you already. Last night was worth every risk." The name was Laura, a colleague from the firm. When I confronted him, he looked tired more than sorry. "It just happened," he said. "You've changed, Rachel. You're always tense, always watching Eli. There's nothing left for us anymore." We tried counseling. For Eli's sake. But his heart had already left. He moved out a month later, said he'd send support once he got settled. I never told my parents the full truth. I knew how that story would be spun. Sure enough, when I finally called to say we'd separated, my mother's voice was sharp and smug. "Well, men don't leave happy homes, Rachel. What did you do to drive him away?" And just like that, I was a single mother. Alone again, except this time, it wasn't just me I had to protect. It was Eli too. And I was determined not to fail him. It started with an invitation, handwritten, surprisingly warm, and signed, "With love, Mom and Dad." They were hosting a family gathering at Timberstone Lodge, a luxury mountain resort in Colorado, to celebrate what they called the enduring Monroe legacy. There would be catered dinners, a professional film crew, even a drone for aerial shots. "We're putting together a family documentary," the letter read. "A gift for future generations. We hope you and Eli can join." I stared at the words for a long time. It had been 4 years since I last saw them. Since the divorce. Since I stopped returning their half-hearted holiday calls and thinly disguised lectures about getting my life back on track. I should have thrown the invitation away. But Eli had just turned 7, and lately he'd been asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Do I have cousins? Why don't we visit Grandma and Grandpa? Does Uncle Kyle like me? The truth was complicated. And heavy. Too heavy for a child with a lunchbox covered in dinosaurs and a heart that still believed in people. So I told myself this time would be different. Maybe they'd changed. Maybe becoming grandparents softened something. Maybe being older meant being wiser. Or maybe I just wanted my son to experience the version of family I had always dreamed of. You're really going back? My friend Tessa asked when I told her. I think so, I said. For Eli. The drive up the mountain was breathtaking golden aspens swaying in the wind, snow still clinging to the peaks like powdered sugar. Eli sat in the back seat, humming softly, holding a list of fun things to do at the lodge he'd found online. Do you think Uncle Kyle will let me try his drone? He asked, eyes bright. We'll see, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Timberstone Lodge looked like something out of a catalog. Massive stone fireplaces, vaulted ceilings, rustic beams polished to perfection. A concierge in a navy blazer greeted us by name. Welcome, Miss Monroe. Your family's already checked in. You're in Suite 14. Deck. Suite 14 turned out to be the smallest one, tucked near the staff elevators with a view of the parking lot. Of course. But Eli didn't care. He threw himself onto the bed, bouncing and laughing. This is so cool. Can we explore the hiking trails after dinner? Absolutely, I said, brushing a hand through his hair. Just us. Downstairs, I heard laughter echoing from the main hall. When we entered, a woman with a headset was adjusting camera angles while my mother posed beside a floral arrangement. Rachel, she exclaimed, you made it. She air-kissed my cheek, then turned to Eli. And look how tall you are. You have your mother's curls. My father appeared next, more formal. A handshake instead of a hug. Glad you're here, he said. Kyle's preparing a speech for the welcome dinner. He's doing remarkable things in education reform. You'll hear all about it. Azan. Of course I would. Kyle arrived moments later in a tailored blazer, his wife Lauren on his arm. Look who decided to show up, he grinned, tone just sharp enough to sting. And with the next generation of noise machines. Eli's smile faltered. I swallowed the rising heat in my throat. This wasn't about healing. It wasn't about legacy. It was about image. Control. Keeping the Monroe brand polished and perfect. And somehow, I had walked right back into it. By the second day at Timberstone Lodge, it was clear nothing had changed. Not really. On the surface, everything looked polished. The matching monogrammed polos my parents handed out for family hike day. The overenthusiastic camera crew weaving through breakfast like we were shooting for a reality show no one had asked for. The catered dinners. The forced smiles. But beneath all of that, the same hierarchy. The same roles. The same quiet humiliations dressed up as just teasing. End of quote. Eli noticed it first. At lunch, the kids gathered around the big oak table near the fireplace, trading Pokemon cards and slurping sodas. Eli, excited to join, held up a card and said, "This one's holographic. I got it for my birthday." One of Kyle's sons, Logan, 10 going on 40, snorted and said, "That's not even rare. Everyone has that one." The other cousins giggled. Eli's smile dropped just a little. Later, when the kids went outside to play cornhole, Eli grabbed one of the beanbags and tossed it too early. Logan rolled his eyes. "You're not supposed to throw yet, duh." That tone. The exact one I remembered. I watched from the porch, every muscle in my body tensed. It was all too familiar, mocking disguised as rules, exclusion masked as etiquette. Back inside, things weren't much better. At dinner, My mother asked if I'd found a real job yet, despite me having worked at the same firm for 3 years. I saw your LinkedIn, she said, sipping from her wine glass. Still just communications associate? Maybe it's time to aim a little higher, sweetheart. I manage the brand team now, I said evenly. We just finished a statewide campaign. Oh, she smiled thinly. That's nice. Those. Meanwhile, Kyle launched into a monologue about his latest education initiative, complete with buzzwords like transformational equity and disrupting outdated learning models. My father beamed, nodding after every sentence like a proud coach at a press conference. At one point, Lauren Kyle's wife tried to loop me in. Rachel, didn't you study something similar in college? I opened my mouth, but Kyle cut in. She majored in media something, I think. She always liked the artsy stuff. Ugh. Laughter. Light, polite, but it landed like a slap. Later that night, in our suite, Eli sat cross-legged on the bed, unusually quiet. Do they not like me? He asked suddenly. My heart twisted. Why would you say that? They don't let me play the fun parts. And Uncle Kyle said I talk too much, and Grandma told me to stop fidgeting at dinner. I closed my eyes. Took a breath. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that some families confuse cruelty for structure? That some adults pass down the same coldness they once received and call it tradition? You're amazing, exactly as you are, I said, pulling him into a hug. Some people just don't know how to handle brightness. He leaned into me, still quiet. I lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I thought I could rewrite a script they never stopped performing. The characters hadn't changed, only the stage. And this time, I wasn't the only one standing in the spotlight. Now Eli was there too. The morning began like any other at Timberstone's, sunlight spilling through the wide glass windows, the scent of maple bacon drifting up from the kitchen, and Eli's excited footsteps as he rushed to get dressed. He'd chosen his favorite shirt, the navy one with the rocket ships. He even brushed his own hair lopsided, but proud. Today's talent show day, he said, eyes bright. Miss Leah said I could sing for the camera crew. Miss Leah, one of the assistant producers, had noticed his humming during the group hike the day before and suggested he sing something fun and short while they captured candid family footage. Eli had taken that as an official invitation to perform. I was nervous, but he was glowing. In the great room, the camera crew was setting up for the brunch segment. Tables had been rearranged, the fireplace lit, mimosas poured. My father was already seated. Reading the Wall Street Journal like this was just another Sunday. Eli joined the other kids in the corner of the room near the window. They were building towers out of coasters and sugar packets. I hovered by the coffee station, trying to stay close without hovering too much. Then, without cue or announcement, Eli stood up. He took a deep breath, faced the group, and began to sing. It was a silly song, something about outer space and jelly beans. Off-key in places, too loud in others. But it was pure Eli. For a moment, everything stilled. A few people looked over. Some smiled politely. Lauren gave a soft clap in rhythm. But I saw Kyle. The tightening jaw. The fingers curling around his glass. And I knew. He stood up slowly, with the heavy deliberateness of someone who expects not to be questioned. Eli, he said sharply. My son looked up, mid-verse. His smile faltered. Kyle crossed the room in 6 long strides. I started toward them, instinct rising like a fire, but I was blocked by my aunt asking me something about the buffet. Just a second too late. And then, the slap. It wasn't hard to hear. The sharp crack of palm against cheek rang out, silencing the room. Eli stumbled back, hand to his face, eyes wide in disbelief. My breath caught. For a split second, no one moved. Then Kyle spoke, voice thick with disgust. Enough. Someone had to teach the kids some manners. My father didn't look up from his paper. Frankly, he's been testing boundaries all weekend. And my mother laughed. A soft, breathy sound. Almost reflexive. Something in me fractured. I ran to Eli, dropping to my knees. His cheek was already red, his bottom lip trembling. "I was just singing," he whispered. I pulled him close. "I know, baby. I know." All around us, silence. Embarrassed shuffling. Eyes darting away. And Kyle, standing above us, shaking his head like we were the ones who'd ruined brunch. I looked up at him and said, quietly but clearly, "Don't you ever touch my son again." He sneered. "Maybe if you had the spine to discipline him, someone else wouldn't have to." I stood, Eli in my arms, my heart pounding in my ears. No more second chances. No more excuses. Something had just happened that could never be undone. And none of them even realized it. Back in our suite, I sat on the floor, Eli curled against me with a cold cloth pressed to his cheek. He wasn't crying anymore, just quiet. Still, that scared me more than the tears. I kept whispering to him that he was safe, that it wasn't his fault, that his voice was never something to be punished. But I wasn't sure if he was even listening. A knock at the door made me flinch. "Room service," a voice called gently. Then, after a pause, "Rachel, it's Leah." And Olf. I opened the door halfway, shielding Eli with my body by instinct. Leah stood there without her headset, without her clipboard. Just her, in a hoodie and jeans, holding a flash drive in her hand. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. She sat down across from us, cross-legged on the carpet like we were all kids hiding from something bigger. "I saw what happened," she said softly. "And I think you should have this." She held out the flash drive. I stared at it. "What is it?" "It's the raw footage," she said. "From this morning. Audio and video. Full resolution." I didn't know what to say. "Look, we weren't supposed to be filming during brunch," she continued. "But the director had us keep rolling in case something candid happened. Most of the crew was focused on the main table. But I left one of the gimbal cams running in the corner by the kids. And one of our ambient mics was still live, hooked near the coffee bar." He blinked. "You mean?" She nodded. "It caught everything. The singing. The slap. Kyle's words. Your parents' reactions." A silence settled between us. Heavy. "I'm not supposed to give this to anyone," she added. "But I couldn't. I couldn't just pretend it didn't happen." Eli looked up from the couch, still subdued, still silent. Leah smiled at him gently. "You have a beautiful voice," she told him. "Don't let anyone take that away from you." I reached for the flash drive with a trembling hand. It felt heavier than it should. "I don't know what I'll do with it," I admitted. "You don't have to know yet," she said. "But now you can choose." She stood, brushed her hands on her jeans, and moved toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. "They'll probably try to wipe the official backups tonight," she said. "The producer's already taking calls from your father. But that," she pointed to the drive, "that's yours. Off the system. No watermarks. No metadata trace." I swallowed hard. "Why are you helping me?" Leah looked back at me, eyes steady. "Because I saw the look on your son's face," she said, "and because I used to have one just like it." Then she left. I closed the door and locked it behind her. Eli shifted on the couch. "Are we leaving now?" he asked quietly. "Yes, baby," I said. "We are." But this time, we weren't just running away. We were leaving with the truth. And the power to decide what came next. Back at home, everything felt too quiet. Eli was sleeping on the couch, still clutching his stuffed dinosaur. There was a faint red mark left on his cheek, like a question the world hadn't answered. I stared at the flash drive on the kitchen table, untouched for hours. Leah's words echoed in my mind. "Now you can choose." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my laptop, headphones on, and opened the file. It was all there. The laughter. The mimosas. Eli's voice, clear and sweet, rising above the clink of silverware. Kyle's footsteps. The slap. The sound was sharper than I remembered, violent in its casualness. And then Kyle's voice, cruel and dismissive. Someone had to teach the kids some manners. My father's response, folding his newspaper like nothing had happened. Frankly, he's been testing boundaries all weekend. And my mother's laugh, that awful, breathy laugh. The rage didn't come all at once. It arrived in slow, pulsing waves. Sadness, disbelief, guilt, then anger. I replayed one moment again and again. Eli's tiny voice, trembling. I was just singing. The next day, I called a friend from college, Naomino, a civil rights attorney in Denver. She listened. She asked questions. Then she asked to hear the file. When it ended, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "This is damning. You could press charges. Emotional trauma, assault, even grounds for civil action." "I don't want money," I told her. "I want people to know who he is. Especially the ones who trust him with their kids." Kyle sat on the board of Voices Rising, a youth arts nonprofit. He'd recently done a video campaign about cultivating safe, creative spaces for children. He also coached a junior debate team on weekends, and his company, Holden and Prescott Law, had a code of conduct stricter than most Ivy League admissions. So I wrote 3 letters. One to the board of Voices Rising, one to the managing partners at Holden and Prescott, and one to the parent council of the Junior Debate League. Each letter was short, factual, and calm. No exaggeration. No emotion. I attached a clean copy of the audio file and explained exactly what was captured. A grown man slapping a child for singing, followed by verbal humiliation and complicity from the family around him. I didn't name Eli. I didn't name myself. But I made it clear that if they wanted the full story including visual footage, I was willing to speak. Then I hovered over the send button for a long time. I thought about Eli's face, his voice, his question. Do they not like me? And then I clicked send. 1, 2, 3. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent or spoken up? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how you would have handled it. Because for me, silence had protected too many people for too long. Now it was time for the truth to speak. And this time, someone was going to listen. It started with silence. For nearly 24 hours after I sent the emails, there was nothing. No calls. No replies. Just the quiet hum of my refrigerator, the ticking of the hallway clock, and the soft sound of Eli humming to himself as he colored at the kitchen table, his singing slowly returning, note by note. Then, everything came at once. First, an email from Voices Rising. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We take child safety very seriously and have placed Mr. Monroe on immediate administrative leave pending internal review." An hour later, a call from Holden and Prescott's HR department. I didn't answer, but the voicemail was clipped and formal. "We are conducting a confidential investigation into conduct unbecoming of an executive team member. We would appreciate a follow-up conversation if you're willing to speak." By late afternoon, I heard from the Debate League. A message on their Facebook page read, "We are pausing Mr. Monroe's involvement in all youth programs until further notice." And then, Kyle called. Blocked number. No voicemail. Just call after call after call. Then came the texts. "Kyle, what the hell did you do?" "Kyle, the board called an emergency meeting." "Kyle, you need to fix this." "Kyle, now." I didn't reply. My parents weren't far behind. "Mom. Rachel, this is getting out of hand." "Dad. You're blowing this out of proportion." "Mom. Please call us. We can sort this out privately." End of section. It was fascinating, in a way. How quickly their concerns shifted not toward Eli, or what had actually happened, but toward damage control. They weren't asking why, they were demanding how I could have exposed it. But I wasn't done being silent for their comfort. Then, something unexpected happened. Amanda's older sister called. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. "I heard," she said. Her voice was low, measured. "I saw the clip. Paul forwarded it." I didn't say anything at first. I was bracing for the usual. Disbelief, minimization, blame. But then she added, I believe you. I exhaled. Slowly. I should have said something sooner, she continued. A few years ago, Kyle grabbed Logan's arm so hard during a family picnic that he left bruises. Said it was because Logan was talking back. I told myself it wasn't my business. That I'd imagined it. I swallowed. You didn't imagine it. No, she said quietly. And I'm sorry I stayed quiet when it was your son. And Ozzy. That night, I sat at the edge of Eli's bed, brushing his hair back as he slept. His breathing was slow, peaceful. For the first time in days, he looked untroubled. I thought about everything we'd lost. The illusion of family. The fragile hope of reconciliation. The safety I once believed could be rebuilt. But what we gained felt heavier. Stronger. We had the truth. And we weren't alone anymore. The invitation came in the form of a phone call from my grandmother. Sunday, she said, her voice as steady and commanding as ever. 2:00, everyone will be here. I want both sides of the story. I paused. There aren't two sides to what happened, Grandma. Maybe not, she said. But there are people who still think there are. Come say your piece. The last time the whole family had been summoned to Grandma Iris's house, it was for her 80th birthday. This time, the occasion felt heavier, quieter, like a storm gathering just past the horizon. I left Eli with Tessa. Dr. Alvarez, his therapist, had made it very clear Eli didn't need to be in the room for this. Healing comes with protection, she'd said. Let him be a child today. Let the adults face what they need to face. Grandma's house sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, wrapped in ivy and memories. The living room hadn't changed, in decadescent velvet armchairs, same porcelain figurines lining the fireplace. But the tension? That was new. My parents sat stiffly on the couch. My mother wore a silk scarf and an expression that dared anyone to challenge her version of events. My father, as usual, looked like he was mentally somewhere else. Kyle stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes bloodshot. Amanda sat apart, hands folded in her lap, gaze on the floor. Around them, aunts, uncles, cousins filled the chairs and cornered some whispering, others pretending this was just another family tea. Then Grandma Iris entered, cane tapping, voice clear. I've lived long enough to see 5 generations of Monroes, and I've never been more disappointed. No one interrupted. She turned first to Kyle. You hit a child, your nephew, for singing. It wasn't that hard, Kyle muttered. And she's blowing this out of proportion. Be quiet, Grandma snapped. When a grown man hits a child, the force is irrelevant. The betrayal isn't measured in bruises. Then she turned to my parents. And you stood by. You dismissed it. You laughed. My mother bristled. Rachel has always been difficult, always twisting things. Grandma raised a hand. I know exactly what kind of household your husband ran. I watched the patterns repeat themselves in your children. She looked straight at my father. Howard, your silence was as loud as your father's fists. The room went still. Amanda spoke next. I saw Kyle grab my son, years ago. I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place. I may. Uncle Greg, from the corner, cleared his throat. I saw Kyle shove a colleague at the 4th of July barbecue. Same temper. Same entitlement. Voices started to rise. Other stories. Other moments. Things people had witnessed but swallowed. The room filled with the sound of reckoning. When it quieted, Grandma looked at me. You did what no one else had the courage to do, she said. You protected your child, at great cost. That deserves respect. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Then, for the first time since the lake house, I spoke directly to Kyle. You didn't just hit my son, I said. You made him question whether his voice was something to be ashamed of. And that is the damage. That's what I will never forgive. Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. Some lines, once crossed, don't fade. They become fault lines. And in that room, for the first time, everyone saw the cracks. In the weeks that followed the gathering at Grandma Iris's house, the ground beneath our family shifted. Not in a dramatic, earthquake kind of way. More like the slow but undeniable shifting of tectonic plates, quiet, steady, irreversible. There were fewer phone calls from my parents, and when they did come, they were stiff, overly formal, laced with things unsaid. My father emailed me once to ask if Eli had recovered from his outburst. I didn't respond. But Amanda called more often. We weren't suddenly best friends, but there was something new in her voice when she spoke. A softness, a careful honesty. One night, she told me, "I've been journaling again, trying to unpack things we grew up thinking were normal." I told her I was proud of her. And I meant it. As for Kyla, was quieter now. Removed from the board, sidelined at work, and noticeably absent from family group chats. Lauren, his wife, reached out once to say she was separating from him. Not because of the fallout, she clarified, but because it wasn't a safe place to raise a child, if we ever had one. That hit me harder than I expected. Not because I mourned their marriage, but because it reminded me just how many people stay in painful places for far too long, waiting for them to become something else. Meanwhile, Eli was healing in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. He started singing again. First in whispers during playtime, then full voice in the car, and finally just 2 weeks ago on a small stage at his school's spring showcase. He sang a silly, upbeat song about stars that don't ask permission to shine. I cried through the whole thing. When the show ended, he ran into my arms and said, "Did you see me? I wasn't nervous." "You were amazing," I said. "You always are." At work, something shifted too. My manager pulled me aside after a client pitch and said, "You've been sharper lately. Clearer. Like you found your footing." I smiled. Maybe I had. I started volunteering with a local parenting circle that focuses on breaking generational cycles. One night, after sharing just a small piece of our story, a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. "My daughter sings all the time," she said. "And I've been telling her to tone it down without realizing why. Thank you for the reminder that loud can be beautiful." That night, I wrote it down in my journal. Family is not who makes you small to keep the peace. Family is who makes space for your light, even when it shines inconveniently. We began creating our own rituals, me and Eli and the people who chose us. Pancake Saturdays. No apology dance parties in the living room. Monthly bravery badges for things like speaking up, saying no, and singing in front of strangers. We weren't rebuilding the old idea of family. We were building something new entirely. Something kinder. Something rooted in truth. Something we could grow into, not shrink for. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place at the table. I had made my own. The day Eli asked if he could perform at the city's youth talent night, I froze for a second. Not because I was scared for him, but because I realized I wasn't scared for me. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for the looks, the judgment, or the whispers from anyone who used to be called family. I was simply proud. The event took place in the community center downtown. The stage was modest foldable risers, a string of fairy lights, and a creaky mic stand that leaned slightly to the left. But for Eli, it might as well have been Madison Square Garden. He wore a navy sweater, mismatched socks, and a grin that could power the whole building. When his name was called, he climbed the steps, took a breath, and said, "This song is for people who've ever been told to be quiet, when all they wanted was to be heard." The room fell silent. And then he sang. It wasn't just the notes, though they were clear and full of color. It was the way he owned the space. The way he looked straight into the lights instead of away from them. There was no shrinking. No hesitation. He was 7. And he was free. As I watched him, tears welled up, not from sadness, but from something deeper. The kind of healing that doesn't erase the scars, but gives them meaning. Because this story wasn't just about Eli's voice. It was about mine. The one I'd spent years softening, doubting, suppressing to fit into a mold that was never made for me. The voice that stayed silent at family dinners, that apologized before speaking, that questioned its right to be firm or angry or visible. But I wasn't silent anymore. In fact, that night, after the applause faded and we were walking to the car, Eli looked up at me and asked, "Mom, why didn't you sing when you were little?" I smiled. "Because no one ever told me I could." He nodded. "Then it's good you told me. 'Cause now I know." Yes. Now he knew. And maybe, just maybe, someone else watching that video later would know too. If this story made you feel seen, if it reminded you of a time you had to fight to be heard, drop a heart in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Because around here, every voice matters. I don't know what's next for our little two-person family. But I do know this. Our voices won't be dimmed again. We'll raise them, steady and sure. Not to shout above others, but to remind ourselves, and maybe the world, we were never too loud. They were just never ready to listen. And now, we speak anyway.